Hi, welcome everybody to another Monash Matters. I'm here today with Dr Julie Sladden. I want to let you know that after meeting up with Julie, Julie's come on board to help me, come on to my staff to help me understand the technicalities of what we're talking about sometimes, so I don't ever mislead or give you any misinformation on the program. So, Julie, welcome from beautiful Tasmania. I've got some good friends down there, including the member for Braddon, who's I love when people bring practical life's experience into the Parliament, and the member for Braddon certainly does. Good man. Julie, would you like to give us a bit of introduction and tell me how you got to this place that you find yourself in as a former GP? Well, I won't say a former GP because you could go back to it any time, I hope. And I look forward to our discussion today. Julie.
Hi, Russell, and hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on today, Russell, and it's just great to be able to chat with your viewers and constituents a bit more about what I'm doing on the team and how I'm hoping to help move things along. So, yeah, I'm a doctor. I've been a doctor for over 25 years now, which points to my age a little. We're all young here. But I was forced to close my practice in the wake of the mandates back in 2021, alongside many other people as well who were affected by the mandates, because I simply refused to get jabbed. And there are a number of reasons for why that was a personal decision for me, but I also had a very strong ethical opposition to the mandates. And so I went and spoke to as many of our local elected members as I could about informed consent, which I believed was being just basically trodden all over. And this was in the lead up to the mandates coming into effect. And when they came into effect, unfortunately, I was forced to close my practice. I wasn't allowed to even do telehealth unjabbed, which is absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, and since then I've been writing and advocating and speaking out on behalf of those people who've lost their jobs or people who have suffered injuries from the injections, and really just trying to shine a light and bring out the truth of what's happened around this country over the last few years, because at the moment this is what healthcare looks like for me. So yeah. And we met last year, Russell, when partly in my writing and advocating role, and I was invited onto the team, and it's been a wild ride, but yeah, wonderful too.
You've had your own walk and experience in this capacity since your forced retirement as a GP. You've written how many articles now for only one magazine, or do you do a number of magazines?
That's a good question. Gosh, I've lost count, but it's not because it's numbering in the hundreds. It just sort of fades in the background. But predominantly for the Spectator Australia, a lot of those articles get reprinted in other publications as well, like the Light or the Canberra Daily Declaration. I've also written for the Brownstone Institute, a few other sort of publications, done quite a few interviews and radio interviews now, because of course we need as many doctors to be speaking out at this time. And fortunately I was in a position to be able to step away from my medical practice. So just like to say, I'm not a vocationally registered GP, although I was working independently as a medical practitioner and alongside other healthcare professionals at the time when I closed my practice. I always like to make sure I don't create any dispersions. I've written quite a bit, and I contributed to a few book chapters, and we've got a few things waiting in the wings as well. But communicating with people, especially in a way that's easily digestible, because there's a lot of information that's out there, and I see that as one of my primary roles too, because not everybody's done a science degree, not everybody knows how to read statistics, and I've got to say, I'm not a statistician, but I know statisticians now. So, you really just need to know how to ask really good questions and how to put those answers in terms that are understandable for people. So I see that as part of my role as well, especially in working with you.
Julie, what sort of feedback do you get from the articles that you write?
Well, especially early in the days, when I first started writing, getting them published around the time of the election, and there was a lot. It was quite risky at that stage. I really did expect a letter from AHPRA at any time, because a lot of doctors have been silenced for speaking out. But fortunately, I've never had that letter, but the reactions from people were really just encouraging, and people were so relieved to hear doctors speaking out, because there is, obviously there's, I think, been a paucity of medical professionals speaking out, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We can have a whole separate discussion on why that is. But also, people are just relieved, they're encouraged, and it gives them hope as well that there are many people working in the background, and I'm working alongside a network of other healthcare professionals, other doctors. There are many of them, numbering in the hundreds, and also a multidisciplinary team who are working on this behind the scenes, working to bring the truth out, working to build the community resources and up again, so that Australia has a different direction forward from what we've seen over the last few years.
It's really important that on this program we don't criticise anybody. We don't criticise doctors for decisions that they make, or specialists, or government, or departments. It's not our role. Unlike you, I haven't got a background as a doctor or anything else. My life is common sense and having people around me like yourself who do know what they're talking about. So I make sure that I don't give out any misinformation, because we'd be slaughtered if we did. And so far, what I can see is the misinformation is coming from governments around the world, not necessarily from people like on this program that I have on the program. When we have varied people on the program, we'll have a lot more into the future. But it's important to me that we do not criticise anybody at any time, and we're not going to. People make their own decisions. We're just trying to bring a bit of light onto it and ask the questions that need to be answered. That's all. For people's informed consent, for a start. And would you like to explain informed consent to me?
Informed consent actually has quite a concise definition. It's in the Australian Immunisation Handbook, and it's something legally valid. Informed consent is something that can only be given. So somebody says, yes, I am happy, for example, I'm happy to have that procedure done, or I'm happy to have that treatment, only after they've been given all of the information on risks and benefits and potential costs of any treatment. And it has to be given, there are some specific criteria. It's got to be given voluntarily, without any undue pressure, coercion, or manipulation. And this is something that I've spoken quite strongly about, because as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, that all of those conditions were breached when the mandates came into effect, and with the strategies and the messaging that we saw as the Australian people subject to. So that's that's my view on it, and I've spoken out a lot about that. And I got to say, I 100% agree with you. Criticising people and individuals is not what we're about. We're about asking questions. We're asking good questions, and it's very hard to get absolute answers about things, which is why transparency is so important, especially regarding data, but we have to be asking the questions. And that's something that we saw over the last few years, especially within and outside of the medical profession. Questioning was not allowed. And when that happens, we should all have alarm bells ringing. So we're about asking those really good questions so that we can get to the answers.
Julie, thanks for joining me today. We will be broadcasting this program. We've just spoken to fine gentlemen in Graham Hood and John Larder on their program Club Grubbery. I believe you've been on that program.
Yeah, I love Johnny and Hoodie. They do a great service for the community, and they're a pair that have been asking hard questions from the beginning as well. So yeah, great people, great men.
Julie, as a practicing GP at the time, or a healthcare, what did you call yourself? A health?
I just call medical practitioner.
Medical practitioner. As a medical practitioner, what was it that pricked your ears up regarding these vaccines when you've had a lifetime of vaccines that are specific to certain illnesses? And I've been vaccinated all of my life. So if I have to go overseas, there's certain vaccinations you have to take to go into certain countries. I've always taken the vaccines, but I was advised by three eminent people here just when this began to break. One was a GP who was resigning from his practice because he refused to give the RNA and MA injections. And another one was a gynecologist who refused to give these vaccines to pregnant women. And the other one was a retired GP. All within a week came in to see me. And as a politician, I listened to my constituents and what they're saying. And I began to question very strongly just the whole basis. But what triggered your actions to end up actually losing your practice? What triggered you?
There are a number of things especially in the lead up, I think, that made me sort of start to wonder what was going on. And I remember first when Scott Morrison announced that they were going to make the vaccines, I think the word, as mandatory as possible. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I wonder how he's going to do that, because I knew that basically it's impossible to force somebody to take something against their will. And so, informed consent is that important in medicine. It's the bedrock of good medical ethics. And, if you have to understand under our code of conduct, if you force a patient to, take something against their will, I mean, the consequences are serious. Or if you don't even disclose to them the risks that are relevant to them, or the risks that you're supposed to, the consequences are incredibly serious. So, I started to kind of wonder a little bit around about then, and I knew they were developing a vaccine. I was fairly sure that I wouldn't be having it for a number of reasons, because by that time, really in mid-2020, we actually knew what the infection fatality rate was, because some clever epidemiologists overseas had already done those calculations, and it was around about it was less than 1%. I think it was about 0.2%, in the general community population. So it was very low, and there were some risk calculators available online.
Just explain that to me again. The epidemiologists found, if I've got what you're saying correct, they found that your risk of dying from COVID was less than 1%.
Yeah. In the general community. It was Professor Jay Bhattacharya, John Ioannidis, and a few others. They did a couple of studies in the community in the US to see how prevalent the virus was already and how many of those people were ending up in hospital or dying. And what they learned was there was already about 3 to 4% of the population already had antibodies and, were getting the virus. This was very early on, so March, April 2020, the study was done. And what they also learned was they knew who was most vulnerable. The elderly, they were the ones that were ending up in hospital and dying, and those with multiple comorbidities. But they calculated the overall case fatality rate as extremely low, basically, a flu season. So not, obviously something of consideration, but most of the population didn't need to worry. We needed to focus our protection on those groups that were, at risk. And they knew that in 2020. So I already knew I was at very low risk due to my age, my health status. So it was really something that I wasn't really going to be looking at. I know how to look after my immune system, and I do those things. So when the mandates came into effect in 2021. When the mandates were announced, I couldn't believe it. I literally could not believe it. I was so shocked that the government, our state government, was basically saying anyone who provided any health service at all whatsoever, and that's why telehealth was included, could not provide that service if they weren't vaccinated. And I saw that as an extreme breach of informed consent. Also, by this time, we'd already seen what was coming out of the United States and UK. That the rest of the world was about 6 months in front of us. So we had data coming out. So we could see, number one, that the vaccine wasn't stopping transmission or infection. So it wasn't stopping infection or transmission. So the whole premise for vaccinating someone with the idea of protecting someone else, which has never been the aim of vaccination. The vaccination's always to protect you. So if you're not at risk, which I deem myself at very low risk, and then you're taking it to protect someone else, that made no sense to me, and it just was completely illogical. But not only that, we had, with any new treatment, you've got to know about the history of medicine and, the history of man, I guess, in a way. We never get things 100% right. In medicine, we use time a lot, especially to weed out, what's safe and what's not safe. This is why pharmaceutical research takes 10 years, because time is used a lot. Okay, sure, you can fast forward and warp speed all those steps and compress them, but often things don't become apparent except with the passage of time, because it takes time for some of those effects to manifest themselves. So I said to one of the politicians that I met with, I said, the best that they can say is, I said, they can't say safe and effective. I said, A, I said, we know it doesn't stop transmission, but B, we don't know if it's safe yet because we don't have the data, and we don't have the data because we don't have the time. And it was all of those things together which really just made me stand up and go, this is wrong, because it sets a very uncomfortable precedence for anything that happens in the future. And I looked down the road and I thought, if we don't stand up against this now, there are some very serious consequences, both for this generation and possibly the next.
Julie, I've questioned the authorities. That's all I've done. We do not give out instruction or information or medical information on this program. We don't. We just don't. And part of me having you on board as part of my team is to make sure that we never give out instruction. We never give out. We don't cross across GPs or anything that they're doing. It's like our own form of informed consent. Yes, informed consent. It's our own form of informed consent. We never say what people should or should not do. We're just asking the questions from the data that we see. And I'm sure, Julie, one of the big questions I have for you today is, I see the data come through. You see the data come through. The authorities must see the data come through, the same authorities, especially giving these injections to very young children. With very strong immune systems. In fact, I remember the head of the Children's Hospital in Melbourne saying that they only had one child in there with COVID, and she was in there for another reason. So why would you be vaccinating people against something that they have practically no? Anyway, we probably shouldn't go into that and ask that question, because
that's a good question.
Even if the government of the day today is advocating for people to take their boosters, I'm just questioning where we're really at. I mean, yes, we vaccinate people for people that are vulnerable, but who decides, Julie, who's vulnerable?
Well, that's another good question, isn't it? But I mean, the data on who was at risk right back in the beginning, in 2020, that hasn't really changed. The elderly and those with multiple comorbidities are at risk. Specifically, diabetes too seems to be people with metabolic illnesses are susceptible, and there's a lot that can be done to help support them. And I think asking questions is the absolute key moving forward. And as far as the data is concerned, Russell, you've seen as well as I have that a lot of the data that we're getting it's so slow to come out. It's very hard for it to come out, but even then when it does, we have questions, and then the questions that we get answers to are often unsatisfactory would be the word, but the truth is like a lion, and you really
the UK
can't.
And Israel and America, they seem to have more access to data than we have.
Yeah, they seem, and we use that a lot. What's coming out of the other countries, because it seems to be more readily available.
But then it doesn't seem well, that's happening in the UK. That's not happening here, and I need Australian data. So if we're telling a story about what's going on here, we need to be doing it with Australian data. Yeah. And I believe it's government's responsibility to be open and transparent and get out the data as quickly as possible. So, I'd love to be, from what I've put forward and the questions that I've asked, people know where I stand. I'm not vaccinated, and I'm quite happy with the decisions that I've made about my own body. I just like to have some Australian data, if we could get the data, especially around excess deaths, which I've given a number of talks on. So I'm not afraid to go out there and say there are excess deaths in Australia. They are alarmingly high percentage of increase of people dying in Australia. In fact, it was put to me the other day, it's greater than the road toll, and nobody's saying anything. So, we need Australian data. And is there any areas that you see now, Julie, that data may be beginning to be released?
Well, of course, we've got the Australian Bureau of Statistics data, which comes out, and I'm expecting the final death rate for 2023 to come out, I don't know, hopefully in March or April. But it has, even by their own calculations, the death rate the excess death rate in Australia has been extreme rise. I mean, 4% is significant. We've had up to 15%, and in my own home state, it was 17.3%. In the first part of 2023, which is just alarming. And when you think about how the COVID deaths were talked about on our daily reports, I mean, one person dies, two person dies, whatever, this was making headline news. And now we have this unexplained excess death rate that hasn't been fully investigated. And as you are aware, Russell, a number of doctors have called for, we want this looked into. We want all of the data available to us so that we can actually work what's going on, because you can't just brush it aside and say, well, it's all due to this or it's all due to that, when we haven't actually independently looked at this. And I know that hasn't happened. There is a central repository there's a COVID data set with various parameters that the government has collected. So we know that there is a lot of data there. It's very challenging to get hold of even just some of our, cardiac presentation data. I know that, in Victoria and South Australia, for example, that data had to get obtained under freedom of information. Now, it shouldn't be that hard, especially if we've all got, best interest at heart is to actually get the information, excuse me, and then work out what's going on so that we can then, put things to rights.
Well, another doctor that I know, and it's best that I don't name her, high profile, when the specialist told her she had long COVID, she said, well, that's interesting because I haven't had COVID. Now, and there's a report in the Courier Mail today that talks about long COVID is giving people heart problems with myocarditis and pericarditis and other issues. But certainly not mentioning the vaccinations as a cause of those heart problems, but it's really clear around the world. And Ed Dowd, who is one of the people that I follow, who is not a doctor but just goes on the data, is a data analysis. He used to work for BlackRock and make a lot of money for people by reading the data and investing against that data. And he's calling today once again. He's saying, if it's not the vaccines, what is it? If it's not the vaccines, what is it that's causing these issues?
Exactly.
Julie, we're probably out of time. Thanks for coming on today. I'll probably take the time in this program to have you on at least once a month to just give us an update on where we're at. And I look forward to, of course, working with you, but having you on the program again. So this has been Monash Matters. Thank you, Dr. Julie Sladden, and we look forward to the next program. Thanks.
Thanks, Russell.